All right, welcome back. We got the BRAP. So Kyle Mohan Racing, KMR, thanks for watching, thanks for commenting, and thank you for basically liking and enjoying what we are talking about. We have been talking specifically about rotors and apex seals the past few days. The difference between 2mm and 3mm apex seals, and then what I think would be best for the RX8 Renesis engine in a street application or race application. And I also gave some input on the options for turbo application. So if you want to have any of that information, check out the past few videos. But today we are going to talk about why you don't want to cut too deep into RX8 rotors, and that goes for both the 3mm apex seal modification, which I don't recommend on an RX8 rotor. I recommend cutting it to an RX7 2mm full RX7 height apex seal. That way you've got more beam strength and more apex seal options in the world of buying. And that would be for boosted motors or hybrid motors or running RX8 rotors in traditional RX7 motors, where they have to pass across either a peripheral intake port or a peripheral exhaust port, because the OEM RX8 apex seal is a little short to do that reliably. But if you're running a stock RX8, then hey, an OEM stock RX8 apex seal is just fine, or pick what you like. But I wanted to talk a little bit about why the RX8 rotors are sensitive to modification. The traditional RX7 rotor for a long time has been modified both with lightning, side cutting. Some people do balancing to the rotor. And generally there's enough material there to do these types of modification. Even on the FD3S rotors and a lot of your traditional 2mm seal rotors, apex seal rotors, people in some cases, not something I did that often, but in some cases would modify a 2mm seal rotor to a, you can see the difference, side to side, 3mm seal rotor or 3mm seal groove. And that would give you different options for different reasons, but today there's so many more options in the 2mm RX7 category that unless you're doing something really hardcore, way out there, and even in that case, I think there's gains and drawbacks to going 3mm. So in my 1,000 horsepower 3 rotors, we're successfully running 2mm seals. So with the RX8 rotors, one of the issue becomes material thickness, and RX8 rotor is known as being one of the lightest rotors and one of the highest compression rotors. Although the side seal design, apex seal design is different than RX7's, and in some cases is not considered as favorable. There are some neat things about it. It is a thicker side seal than the traditional RX7 or 12A. RX7, but because of its wedged shape, it's particularly difficult to size properly, and it also tends to have carbon buildup issues. But one of the things I've been told, and at least is in Mazda literature, is that wedged shape design was also part of the design in the Renesis to help deal with carbon buildup in the side port exhaust design. So the rotor in the RX8 was really designed, the side seal shape, the scraper ring that's outside of your oil control rings, and in general for the side port exhaust. And so we do see RX8 rotors get used in RX7 application successfully. You can see that the rotor really was designed for its inherent use in a side port motor. So if being used in RX7, use wisely and make sure to do the necessary machining for whatever your necessary build is. When it comes to it being lightweight, this is both a good and a bad thing for this rotor. You can get late model RX7 rotors down to similar weights. If you do some machine work to them, lighten them up, and they still maintain structural integrity. With the RX8 already being light from the factory, my understanding is it's a thinner casting that's spun cast, with some of the earlier rotors not being as thin or spun cast. But you can see that you run into two issues. One being if you try to modify for a 3mm apex seal groove, we've seen this a few times with customers, there's simply not enough material. You start to get down in there, and within the oil gallery and what the internal rotor shape is, you start to get into rotors being thin, and it's not every particular casting, so you start to get into a situation where sometimes you don't even know if that casting is too thin. It may be just one of the apex seal points. So 2mm, we have been 100% successful with machining and deepening RX8 grooves, and we've had a few customers, and I noticed in the comment section another builder commented and said they had seen failure as well when trying to machine an RX8 rotor for a 3mm style seal. So not recommended, and that's the reason why. It's not that I don't like 3mm, well, maybe it is, but no. Generally, use the seal you want to, is what I always say. Pick wisely, but with the RX8 rotor, it just becomes not necessarily a feasible option, because you don't want to end up machining a pair of rotors and then end up having one of the rotors either fail early on due to lack of material thickness, or just the machining process itself puncture through, and then you've got to go find a new rotor. Or if you're using a brand new rotor, then you've just ruined a brand new component that maybe you were doing a lot of really nice machine work in the effort to build a really nice motor. So my recommendation, like I've said, and you can see in the comment section, is for RX8 rotors, stick to 2mm RX7 apex seals if you plan to deepen the groove. And then similarly, with the RX7 rotors, we were always very successful with lightening. We've got a very good understanding of the depth. Mazda was very consistent in their casting. And over years, multiple different rotary shops around the world have been very successful in doing lightening operations to RX7 rotors. And we can definitely lighten RX8 rotors. We've got the machining process down, but one of the things we learned within the RX8 rotors is they really are a thinner rotor. And you can see right here, this one's all marred up, but we are checking depth. And this is not a drill hole. This is where we simply took a pick and poked through. We had got down to about the same thickness that we machine an RX7 rotor to, and because the RX8 rotor is lighter from the factory, cast thinner from the factory, you cannot machine as much material, and the machining material depth within the casting varies from the center point of the rotor to the outer areas where it actually gets thinner in the corners. So you're not dealing with a rotor that has more material in the corners or mainland areas, and you can see we end up having to do what we consider pocket lightening, which removes less weight in total to avoid any type of failure, and we can't go as deep. So that's kind of an example rotor. Many times over, to dial in machining processes, we find the fail points or we find the extreme point to make sure we can deliver the best quality parts and service. And that's what we have learned, is RX8 rotors are not as thick as RX7 rotors, and that's in RX8 literature because they are lighter. And it is also mentioned that the late model RX7 rotors are lighter because Mazda went to a different style of casting, and I believe it's referred to as spun cast. So just kind of neat stuff. Even the late model RX7 rotors, still consistent. You can still lighten them. You can still have a great time, party time. High compression, low compression options, 2mm RX7, very great for many applications. But if you're working with RX8 rotors, just make sure you're aware of the proper depths and specifications, because they are different both in their seals, dimensions, and casting properties. So I think that's a wrap. To sum it up, If you're going to cut an RX8 rotor up, be careful. Run RX7 seals, not 3mm. Go 2mm, avoid failure. And if it's an OEM RX8, just run the factory seal. I hope everybody has enjoyed the video. If anybody made it this long, I hope that there was less static this time. I'm trying to do better audio. And I appreciate everybody watching and commenting. If this topic is about wrapped up, I've got so much more we can talk about, or anybody has other things they'd like to learn about from the KMR Mazda Tricks community, we're happy to talk about it. I think that is a brap. Brap.